So thanks for the invitation, thanks for the opportunity to be here. This is all pretty much work in progress, so I'm happy to discuss all this stuff. So I'm going to put out some ideas, and then we can see if we can make sense of this. Basically, the talk is structured in 3 sections. First, I'm going to give an introduction to the standard way the problem of persistence is introduced in the debate in philosophy of time. Then I will introduce my specific take or the ideas, which is produrance. The word is a term of art coming from process and then endurance. And in seeing at produrance, you will also see a shift in the focus of the debate, away from only covering changes to also being able to cover persistence and stability, so the other case, because I think that stability, so being the same over time, is as explanation worthy as change. So this is one of the hypotheses of the talk. And then I will sketch an account of powers of how of how stability can be brought about in an ontological way. But this will become clearer in the talk. So let's start with the first thing, with persistence, and the normal way persistence is normally introduced. So just take this. We have time, we have 2 points in time, and we have 2 different properties. So we have, let's say, red here and blue there. And the question normally now is, how is this change possible? Meaning, how is it possible that one thing, one persisting entity, maybe an object, has these properties at different times? The first thing to notice here is that these properties need to be of a specific kind. So if I have blue and then square, these are different properties, but it would not be a change if something changes from blue to square. The category mistake, so to say. The properties need to be incompatible in order to constitute a change. And as you might know, there are different ways of covering incompatibility. You could do it via the genus. Strawson has incompatibility classes, or the famous determinants, determinables distinction from Johnson, which then was made precise by Arthur Pryor. The idea basically is that properties come in clusters. So for example, you have colors, and each thing can have each of the elements of the cluster once. So it must have one of them, but it cannot have more than one of them. So it must be blue, and if it's blue, it cannot be red. And this gives us the first take on the problem of persistence. So the problem of persistence, as I understand it, is how to conceptualize the having of incompatible properties over time. So you have incompatible properties, and they are had, and how to, because I mean that changes happen is quite often, right? So a lot of changes happen, so it's not hard to find examples of change, but how to conceptualize this in an analytic way. There have been different accounts, I'm just naming them here. There might be more, there are newer ones. I just made an overview, and as you can see, the idea is that most of them somehow put a time index somewhere. So either to the object, or to the property, or they have like a 2-place relation where you have the time index in there. The details don't matter too much for what we are going to be talking about here today. But there is more. So if we want to talk about change, I already mentioned this earlier in passing, it needs to be one entity. So famously, David Hugh Mellor said, change needs identity as well as difference. So we've been talking about difference, of how to conceptualize having different, and by different we mean incompatible properties over time. But that what needs to have the properties needs to be one thing in order to constitute a phenomenon of change. Because change has to be distinguished from exchange. Change is, you have one persisting entity, think of an object. Exchange, you have more than one entity and then they exchange. So I can color my bike black, then it's a change. But if I throw the one bike away and buy the same model in black, it's an exchange. And they have to be ontologically kept apart. I don't want to talk about identity as Mellor does, because some of the theories explicitly oppose strict identity over time. So I try to find a more neutral term, which I take continuity, but I know it's not, maybe not the best term, but I just don't want to presuppose strict identity over time, because if you look at it, I made a list of the continuity makers of these theories, and they are different, and exdurantism has a counterpart theory. There is no strict identity over time. So this is just for wording. I would like to already pre-select against one of these theories. But let's not get lost in the details. Let's take a step back. I think the famous, as David Lewis called it, problem of temporary intrinsics is that one object has incompatible properties in the same way. And now all these theories I've listed, and I think this is like the classical debate about perdurance, is they reject that claim in one way or another. So some say it's not one object. Others say, oh no, the property, it's not incompatible properties. So either not incompatible or either no properties, or they're not be had in the same way. And we can actually sort these theories in this cluster. But now, once we're on this level of abstraction, we can start thinking about actually what's at stake here. And I think there are three different problems which have been mixed up. I did it on purpose in the talk, but which sometimes are mixed up not on purpose. I think there's the problem of temporary intrinsics. And the problem of temporary intrinsics is just how to conceptualize having incompatible properties without a contradiction. I'll come back to this. The problem of change is more, because the problem of change includes also the question how it is that these incompatible properties are had by the same thing. So I could, for example, have a theory, sequentialism, which tells you that these objects, so think of just you have instantaneous objects and no persistence. This solves the first problem, because no existence through time, then you don't have a contradiction. But it's of course not an account of persistence, it's an account of change, because here you just have, so it's not that one thing changes, you just have different properties. But it would be a question, an answer to the first question, to the problem of temporary intrinsics. So change is this problem plus the continuity maker, as I will call it, like the second row in the table. But I think there's more. I think there's the problem of persistence, and this leads us to the talk. Because I think staying red is also something which has to be accounted for. Staying red over time is not just being red. So it must be distinguished from just being red. So this is a case. I don't see why this is in of itself not a philosophically interesting case. I know why it was not discussed. Or let's say I have a diagnosis of why the debate focuses on what the debate focuses on. And the idea is, I think this threatening contradiction was what led the debate. So people were thinking, okay, if something is first blue and then red, and it's the same thing, and then you can apply Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals, then we have a contradiction. strictly speaking, you also need to add a principle like if it's red, it's not blue, and then we have like the real logical contradiction. But this is the idea, and there was kind of fear, and they wanted to avoid this contradiction. And this is why the whole debate focuses on cases of change, because only in cases of change a contradiction can arise. In this case, I don't see a contradiction arising. But I think it was kind of forgotten. So I say the focus of the debate was on this thingy. I have some evidence for this. So first, I think that what I called the continuity maker, the last row in the table, is virtually never mentioned. So I had to make these terms up. Some of the theories, if they go for a strange continuity maker, like counterpart relations within time, they mention it. But most of the endurantistic theories, for example, just don't mention it. So this is evidence for me that the focus of the debate is on avoiding the contradiction, not of giving an account, like a positive account of persistence. Positive in the sense of constructive. And also there are no hybrid accounts. This is really interesting. If it could be in the logical space of possibility that, let's say, properties are relations, like one of these theories claims, and that objects have temporal parts, like another of these theory claims. There is no reason why not both of these theories could be right, only if your sole goal is to avoid the contradiction. That would be too much, because then one of these parts would be enough. Right? So only if you think avoiding the contradiction is everything we have to do, you can see why having only one of these possibilities is enough, is sufficient. But if you think about the matter of the thing, if you think about persistence, there's no reason why not both might be true, right? So it's just coming from metaphysics, not from within the debate. Okay, so this is my diagnosis. Just to give it a little bit more flesh. So would it then be, so contradiction freeness is the sole focus on the debate, but I now claim it's, if we don't have a contradiction, it's not that we are problem free. Contradiction freeness is not enough. First of all, as you may know, there are accounts who just accept contradictions. I mean, Hegel or Graham Priest. Then just think about if I have Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals. So if two objects are identical, then they share their properties. You could say this thing, either it's not formed like this in Leibniz, of course, but it's called Leibniz's law. This thing was never meant for the temporal case, so it was wrong to apply it to the temporal case. We just drop it. But then does the problem go away? Is it not still a problem how things change their properties or how things stay stable? So even if I drop this principle and then not be able to derive a formal contradiction, it's not that by that I have solved the problem of persistence or change. The other thing is, and this is of course a little bit unfair because I know you can read how in different ways, but the famous quote from David Lewis from Plurality of Worlds, where he restarted the debate about persistence, the problem of temporary intrinsics as he calls it, ends with, how is such change possible? But an account of how change is brought about is just not in the focus of the debate. So with how is change possible, they mean, how can I conceptualize this without a contradiction? And I would ask, okay, what makes it that something changes from red to blue? Okay. So much for what I think the focus on the debate is. And now let's see if you go along, just even if you disagree, and we can talk about this later, but let's see now from this new perspective where we're not trying to solve this one problem of avoiding the contradiction, but just to get a grip on the problem of persistence, we can have new questions. So what I like to do basically in my project is I want to combine the debate about persistence with the debate about powers, or dispositions, or there are different names for this, capacities, whatever. And because I actually think it's not two separate debates, I think it's one debate. So coming from the theory of dispositions, I've learned that the dynamics of manifestations are really important and understudied. And now coming from philosophy of time, I see the same thing happening in the other direction. Also, note to the side, also think modality is it's part of the parcel, but we'll not talk about this today. Just very roughly, if you have not heard about dispositions, just take this as terminology, not about a definition. The idea is that objects have dispositions. For example, this window is fragile. So the fragility would be the dispositions. Then there are stimulus conditions. For example, me throwing my heavy bottle of water. And there is the manifestation. It would be the breaking of the window. The object is now not breaking, but it is now fragile. So, and a lot of people think that the disposition is part of the cause of the breaking. So the fragility makes it that the object breaks if it's in the right stimulus conditions. Okay. And working on dispositions, I've come to embrace process philosophy in a way, and I will give you a very quick introduction about why I think these thing matters here. So the idea is, just take this case. There's a person as Sam, he or she is on her way to university. As Sam passes the bookshop, about half the way to university, she's struck by lightning. An account of the fatality of her encounter with electricity, Sam never reaches the university. So she was working to university, then she's struck by lightning and never reaches the university. There's something in linguistics which is called the Imperfective Paradox, and it's the following. So from Sam was walking, we can conclude that Sam has walked. As soon as Sam was walking, it is true that Sam has walked. But, this is why I introduced the case of lightning, from Sam was walking to university, you cannot conclude that Sam has walked to the university because she might be struck by lightning, or something else less fatal because her mother calls and she has to go back. So there's a lot of stuff which can go wrong, and if you know the debate about dispositions, you see where this is heading, because this is the debate about dispositions actually focuses just on such cases, the masking, thinking cases, where just something goes wrong in the way of manifesting. So there's a disposition, it's in the stimulus conditions, but then something goes wrong. So the problem of the prevented manifestation is the heart of the debate about dispositions. Okay. But this is also going to talk about dispositions, so let's also not get stuck in the details here. What I found interesting is this take by Michael Thompson, where he attacks the Davidsonian paradigm. And what is important for us is that if you have an ontology of events, of things that happened, you're missing the things that didn't happen. And didn't happen here is like going to university. That is, Davidson forgets about the things that didn't happen but were happening. And here you have the processal aspect. So here you have the processing. Things that didn't happen but were happening. So a disposition manifesting but not coming to the end result. And I think we can use this for the persistence case. So if you think about a disposition and you have a stimulus and then a manifestation is a process, which might lead to an end result or not, which might be interrupted or overlaid with other processes. In the third part, I will tell you a little bit what I think about the overlaying of these thingies. But this is just the first idea. So now we have a dynamic account of dispositions. Process account. So the manifestation of the disposition is a process. Okay. And then you can, but this is just a technicality, it need not be one process, it can be like a Wittgensteinian family resemblance thread of processes. The only thing which is important is that there is not a gap in between where no process is, so no temporal action at a distance. But otherwise it need not be one ongoing process, and maybe even processes, how to identify them might be hard, so it's maybe not that neat picture. There must be process. So maybe a mass term. Maybe a mass term is good. There is process. Even maybe you cannot even count them. Okay. So how does this now relate to the problem of persistence? If we have an ongoing process, the direction now of explanation changes. So we go from here to here. So now we ask, how is this thing, which the A1, which exemplifies the redness, related to this process, and how is this thing, which exemplifies the blueness, related to the process? So the idea basically is you take one underlying process, and this is something I stole, and this kind of solves the problem of temporary intrinsics in the same way as perdurantism and constituentism solves the problem, namely that these two things are not identical. So this is how the problem is solved. But, and this is the important thing, solving the problem is not the reason of this account. So it solves it on the way, but it's supposed to be more. It now opens up the question of how the process and the things which we ascribe properties to, the primary property bearers, are related. Bergson has worked a lot on it. There are other accounts. I like the Bergsonian idea of that things are abstractions. So it's a very nice picture because Bergson does not say that like things and like the normal properties like tables and then colors are non-existent. He just thinks they're not ontologically fundamental. And at the same time, so half of his work is telling why this is important, that we have things and tables for us to navigate in the world, but at the same time we have to be careful not to fall into the illusion that we apply these categories to ontology. So this is why I like to cite Bergson here, but once again, this is the idea is like a big overview talk. Once again, the details don't matter too much. The idea is just now that the direction of explanation has changed. So from this to this. And if you do this, you can directly see, really easily, why the question of stability is parallel to the question of change. Because how you go from here to here is now the explanation. And if these properties now are incompatible or not, it's not so important. Of course, the cases where there are incompatible properties is also an important case, but it's just not. This does not come for free. This is also another step which has to be explained if you buy, so to say, the rest of the picture. Okay. So the idea is we have persistence. And persistence is more than just a question of how to exemplify incompatible properties. It's even more than just a question of how one and the same entity over time can exemplify incompatible properties. It's also how one persisting entity can exemplify properties over time, which might or might not be incompatible. The official answer of the proto-durantist is that the persisting entity and the primary property bearer are not identical. So we don't have identity here, but we also don't have identity here. The process is the persisting entity, that which accounts for existence through time. And then we have the abstractions from this process, and they are the primary property bearers. And this is why we don't have the contradiction, but avoiding contradictions is not the whole thing of it. Now the new thing is, now this account is not made to solve a nitpicky philosophical problem. It's not tailor-made for one specific problem in the philosophy and analytic philosophy, so it might have the potential to be applicable to broader domain. Because now, if we look at these cases where something has the same property over time, we can look for cases of stability. And I said that stability is ontologically as explanation worthy as change. And now I say more. Now I say de facto, there are a lot of cases, a lot of really interesting cases of stability. The examples are, for example, the human body. To roughly stay in the same change, you have to make exchange of matter. The German word is Stoffwechsel, which is so nice because it has the Aristotelian ring to it. And so we have to constantly exchange matter to say roughly, and even the persistence conditions of human bodies would be if we stop doing Stoffwechsel, we stop persisting. Then we have a qualitative change from a human person to a dead body. So this would be really... or a solar system where you have like the rotation and the gravitation to keep it like roughly stable, and then if it doesn't work, or you have the yeah, no, then it's a problem. Yeah, you know, right? Then it either collapses or okay, we cut this out. Okay, or you have like, and I've been interested in social ontologies more, and there is it also with social systems which sometimes only can persist by a very stable, very, very fine-grained balance of powers from internal and external powers. And so this is, these are just ideas. There are more. This is what I'm doing. I'm just exploring. So I'm interdisciplinary. See if this could be. This could be applicable outside philosophy, but I will use the last time of the talk to give you a little bit hint about how I see. So these cases of stability are special examples, right? In principle, theoretically, there are two cases of stability. There's idle stability, and think about Newton's second law or something, or a lone particle in the void, where something persists in the state it is just because nothing is happening to it. Nothing stops it from persisting either at the place where it is or in uniform motion. This is the boring kind of stability, persistence and stability. But I also don't think, so if anything what Nancy Cartwright has written is right, this is cases which are never there. So in the debate of laws of nature, we normally think that these laws don't have instances. So we don't think that the world is like this. In principle, it's possible, but actually there's a lot of going on. The world is like a messy chaos. So there are cases of stability, and maybe all or most, or I don't know, but there are cases of stability where stability is brought about. Where the stability is the result of some interacting factors, let's say. And I think the examples I just given you are examples of this, and I think there are many more. So the interesting cases of stability are cases where stability is brought about. So in the last part of the talk, I will give you a little bit more on dispositions and how they might help us make sense of this kind of stability. Okay. So let's go back. I like Millkan's oil-drop experiment as an example. If the example doesn't work for you, or you think the physics are different there, and a lot of people I talk about with this don't agree with my interpretation, but you can still, on an abstract level, maybe follow what I'm saying and just say it's a bad example. The idea is that you have this oil drop with its electrically charged, and it has a mass, and you, in the equilibrium case, you have the plate condenser in such a way that the electrical field of the plate condenser just counteracts the gravitational pull. So the oil drop stays stable, this is the equilibrium case, because the gravitational pull and the electrical pull both hold it together. So I think it's a little bit of if you do like the rope pushing thing with the flag in the middle. And And I think this is the case of stability too. This is the case of resulting stability. Think of other examples if you don't like this one. Stephen Mumford and Rani Del Anjum in Getting Causes from Powers write on a similar case that nothing happens precisely because the dispositions involved balance each other out, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that the dispositions balance each other out. Or maybe this is not specific enough, because I don't think that the gravitational pull goes away when there is also electrical pull. And you can see this, for example, if you make like a lot of experiments, a row of experiments, like not one single case, and if you change this is actually how you do it in a Millkan case, if you change the electric current, and then you can see it's slowly falling, or then it's falling even more slowly than it's in the equilibrium case, and if you raise it, it's even rising. Normally you do it that you change the polarity of the plate dispenser. So I don't think that the dispositions cancel each other out. I think something else cancels each other out. So let's see what we have here now. So we have the dispositions and we have the resulting behavior. And the resulting behavior here is that it stays stable. We have the dispositions, we have the gravitational disposition, and we have the electrical disposition. If they're both away, and all the other factors are away, it doesn't move, and if they're both there, it doesn't move in the equilibrium case when I fine-tune it. Okay. So I think that we need something in between the dispositions and the occurrent property behavior. Because, as Nancy Cartwright rightly puts it, the manifestation is fixed even if the behavior described in the current property language is highly various. So applied to our case, we have the gravitational disposition. We have the manifestation of the gravitational disposition, the gravitational pull. And independent of whether I have the electrical current on or which power I apply through the plate condenser, independent of the electrical pull, the gravitational disposition is there. So it's stable through all these cases. But the resultant property behavior, the resultant behavior is highly various. Because it's falling more slow, hovering, even rising. Okay. So what we need to do is have a three-part distinction between the manifestation, right, which is the exercise of the capacity, the obtaining of the capacity, and the occurrent property behavior. So we need something in between here. Which I would call Wirkungen. And I specifically have the German term because I think it should sound like a term of art to most, which is good because it's something which I want to use in a specific way, but which should also have a ring to it. So if you know the word, it was chosen for a reason. But if you don't know the word, it's good. And as you see me struggling with English, I like to see other people struggling with German and try have to have them pronounce Wirkungen, which I like. Good. So I think we have a three-part ontology, and you might now already see where this is leading, because with this intermediate level, we can explain stability, which is brought about. Because now we have the ontological space to have these cases. There are a lot of words for these three. So people talk about the manifestation. This is just from one paper by Cartwright and Pemberton, and all these words are used in this one paper. I just made a very small analysis. So it can be, sometimes you talk about the force, like philosophical force, the component and the result, a contribution. It tries to X. And then the X, the attraction and the movement, and then you have disposition, capacity, power. So there are a lot of words for this, but what I like is these three different categories. So we have the gravitational disposition, we have the gravitational pull, and then we have the movement. And in the stability cases, Right? We have the case where it doesn't move because there is no pull, and we have the case where it doesn't move because the pulls cancel each other out. Not the dispositions, I think, but the pulls. Okay. The last part, this is stable. So disposition, because it's like in its nature, but most people agree that this is stable, this link from a disposition to its manifestation, Wirkung. And this is kind of various. And this is where the problems come in, because even if the same Wirkung is there, I'm not sure that it will show the right behavior. And I think, so this link has to be filled. I have a proposal of how to fill it. Very roughly, the idea is that you have combination rules. So you have a set of possible resultant behaviors. And then you have a set of possible present manifestations. Either no manifestations are present, this is the case where the thing is not moving because, or you have just a gravitational pull, just the electrical pull, or both. There's a mistake, there should be an M3. And now we have a function from this, which is a set of sets, to this. And the good idea about this function is that although the codomain of the function is highly various, the function itself is stable. This is the idea. So you have a stable function, it's the same function for all the cases, but it gives you different results. You could add the spatial arrangement as another factor, because the spatial arrangement, some people like Molnar think, is not a disposition itself. But here it gets tricky again because space. Yeah. But you could add this as another factor, and then you have a function which combines these and gives you then. The whole idea is that this is various, but this link is stable. That these combination rules are built into the dispositions themselves. But this is once again a detail which doesn't matter too much. So the last two slides, wrapping it all up, the big picture. If we allow ourselves a very non-Humean ontology with dispositions, manifestations, and the resulting behavior, so a triadic ontology, we have the tools to account for cases of stability which is brought about, because we have the stability on a resulting behavior level, but we can have the manifestations there or not. So we can distinguish in the cases where stability is just happening, the boring kind, stability 1, or where stability is brought about by dispositions interacting. Now, the last thing which I have to do is get the second part and the third part of my talk together, because this all sounded very stable, and the official answer is that the manifestations, the gravitational pull, is a process. Because it's not that there's pull once and it's an ongoing pull. A gravitational pull, it's an attraction process, and we have another process. So on the middle level we have processes which interact, and they give you a resulting behavior process, because staying in this spot is a process over time. It's not being in this spot. So the official picture is these are processes And these are processes, so a lot of processes, a lot of ontology, but yeah, and a lot of stuff. Okay, thank you for the time.